At church brunch, my daughter-in-law introduced me as the babysitter who wouldn't move out. Those words hit me like a cold slap across the face, in front of everyone. I could feel every eye in the room on me. The laughter, the uncomfortable silence that followed. It wasn't the first time I had been humiliated, but it was by far the most public. For years, I had lived with my son and his wife, helping to raise their children. I took pride in the role I played. But now, with every passing day, I felt myself becoming more invisible, more of a burden. Emily, my daughter-in-law, had never been particularly warm, but this was something else. She had made it clear she didn't want me there anymore. And yet I stayed. I kept thinking that I was doing what a good mother and grandmother should do. But now, as I sat at that brunch table, the weight of her words sank in. I wasn't wanted. I was just an old woman who needed to move on. It's fine, I told myself, smiling through the sting. I had lived through worse. But that didn't make it easier. My son, Tom, sat there, silent as usual. He never stood up for me anymore. Not when Emily snapped at me, not when I was asked to stay in the background. No, he just looked the other way. He had changed. Or maybe it was me who had changed. I didn't know when it happened, but somewhere along the way, I became the one who was expected to stay quiet, to stay out of the way. I had spent my whole life caring for others, and now I was the one being cast aside. I had once been a vibrant part of this family, but now I felt like a shadow that they wished would disappear. As I sat there, pretending to enjoy the meal, I couldn't help but wonder, had they always felt this way? Or was it just the passing of time that had made me feel so invisible? The rest of the afternoon felt like a blur, but the sting of Emily's words lingered. I spent most of it pretending to smile, nodding along to conversations that felt like they were happening in a distant world. Tom barely spoke to me. I couldn't remember the last time we'd had a real conversation, something meaningful, without Emily interrupting or steering the topic elsewhere. It wasn't always like this. When Tom was younger, we shared everything. I used to be the one he came to when he needed advice, when he had bad dreams, or wanted a quiet moment away from his busy life. Now, he barely looked me in the eye. It had been this way for months, maybe even longer. I tried to ignore it, to tell myself it was just a phase. But today, something broke. That was when I realized Emily wasn't the only one pushing me out. Tom had chosen his side. It was clear now, in every little glance, in every conversation where I was no longer involved. I was a ghost in my own family. I couldn't stand it anymore, but what was I supposed to do? I didn't have anywhere else to go. This house, this life, it was all I knew. The next morning, I woke up early, hoping for some clarity. I stood by the kitchen window, looking out at the garden. The flowers I had planted years ago with Tom were still in bloom, but the garden didn't feel like home anymore. It felt empty, much like my life had started to feel. I went through the motions of making breakfast, setting the table, but nothing felt the same. It was as if the house had turned against me, like every room was now a reminder that I was no longer wanted. Emily came down just before breakfast, her eyes avoiding mine. She barely acknowledged me. It hurt, but I was used to it. As I set the plates down, she glanced up at me, her expression unreadable. "You know," she said, her voice almost casual, "we've been talking. Maybe it's time you thought about moving out." Her words hit me harder than anything she had said the day before. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I just nodded and kept my focus on the dishes in front of me. What could I say? She was right, in a way. I had outlived my usefulness to them. I wasn't the vibrant woman I used to be, the one who could take care of everything, hold the family together. But it didn't mean I didn't deserve respect. "I'll think about it," I managed to say, even though I knew I wasn't really thinking about anything at all. I was just trying to keep the peace, to survive one more day in a house that no longer felt like home. The days after that breakfast were quieter than usual. The house felt more distant, and so did Tom. He avoided eye contact, speaking to me only when absolutely necessary. Emily, on the other hand, seemed to grow bolder, her comments more pointed, more dismissive. I had always known that she wasn't fond of me living here, but now, it was as if she was actively trying to make me feel unwelcome. One evening, while I was sitting in the living room reading a book, Emily walked in, her arms crossed. "Mom, we really need to talk about your living situation," she said, her tone cold and calculated. "I mean, you're here all the time, and it's just getting awkward for everyone." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at her, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. She wasn't the sweet girl I had welcomed into my family years ago. No, she had changed. She was now a woman who saw me as nothing more than a burden. I took a deep breath. "I know you don't want me here," I said quietly. She was silent for a moment, then shrugged, like she didn't even care enough to deny it. "It's not that," she replied quickly, "but we need the space. We're planning to have more kids, and honestly, it's just a lot." My heart sank. More kids. I had always thought that when Tom and Emily had children, they would want me around, that I would be there to help. But now, I saw it differently. I was just an obstacle in their way. "I understand," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though inside, I was screaming. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden again. The flowers were still there, blooming brightly in the spring sun, but they felt so far removed from me, just like everything else. "I'll start looking for a place," I added, my voice barely above a whisper. It was the only thing I could say. I wasn't going to beg them to keep me here, to make me feel like I mattered. But as I walked away, a small part of me hoped Tom would say something, that he would stand up for me, as he had once done when he was a boy. But he didn't. And I knew, deep down, that he had already made his choice. The next few days passed in a blur of paperwork and phone calls. I didn't have the energy to argue anymore. Emily had been right about one thing. The house was too big for me, and taking care of it was becoming harder. But the thought of leaving, of finding a new place, felt like a betrayal of everything I had known. This house was my home. It held the memories of years of laughter, love, and loss. I had raised my children here. I had poured everything into making it a place of comfort, of refuge. And now, I was being told to leave. I felt like an intruder in my own life. One afternoon, while I was sitting in the living room, staring at the empty spaces that had once been filled with life, Tom came in. He had been quieter than usual lately, avoiding my gaze and speaking only when absolutely necessary. Today, though, he was different. He sat down next to me, his face serious. "Mom," he began, his voice soft, "I know this is hard for you, but I think it's for the best." I looked at him, trying to read his expression. He wasn't angry, but there was something in his eyes that I couldn't quite place. "Guilt? Regret? You're still my mom," he added. "But you know, things have changed." I nodded, though my heart was breaking inside. I had always been there for him. I had always put him first. And now, I felt like I was being cast aside. "I get it, Tom," I said quietly, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill. "You and Emily want your space. You have your own family now. I understand." There was a long silence between us, the weight of everything unspoken hanging in the air. Then, Tom did something that surprised me. He reached out and put his hand on mine, a small gesture of comfort. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I really am. But this is what we need to do." It wasn't much, but it was something. I wanted to believe that he still cared, that he wasn't completely lost to me. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had been replaced, and there was nothing I could do to change it. That evening, as I sat alone in the kitchen, the silence was deafening. The house that had once felt so full of life now felt like a tomb. I had spent so many years taking care of everyone else, and now, it was my turn to take care of myself. But I didn't know where to start. I didn't know how to start over. The days dragged on, and the weight of the decision settled heavily on my shoulders. I began packing up the few things I had, preparing to leave the house that had been my life for so many years. It wasn't just about the furniture or the clothes. It was about the memories I had built here, the countless hours spent taking care of my family, making sure they were happy, healthy, and comfortable. And now, I was being told it was time for me to go. The thought of leaving everything behind, of not being a part of my son's life anymore, was suffocating. But what could I do? The world had moved on, and so had they. Emily was right. Things had changed. I wasn't the woman I used to be, the one who could do everything for everyone. The years had worn me down. My body wasn't as strong, my mind not as sharp, and I could feel the loneliness creeping in, even when surrounded by people. One afternoon, as I was sorting through some old boxes in the attic, I came across a photograph of Tom when he was little. He was sitting on my lap, his small arms wrapped around me in a tight hug. I remembered that moment as if it had happened yesterday. He had been so full of life, so full of love. He used to tell me everything. But now he barely spoke to me. I wiped away the tear that had slipped down my cheek, a small sign of the sadness that had been festering inside me for so long. I didn't want to cry. Not here, not now. But I couldn't help it. I missed my family. I missed the way things used to be. The days when we all sat around the table together, laughing, talking, sharing our lives. It seemed like a lifetime ago. As I closed the box and tucked it away, I realized something. I couldn't let this be the end. I couldn't let them win by pushing me out, by making me feel like I was nothing. I wasn't going to fade into the background of their lives. No, I still had a lot of life left in me. I was going to find my own way, even if it meant starting over. It wasn't going to be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is. The next morning, I made a call. I wasn't sure where this journey would take me, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to sit by and let my family forget who I was. I was stronger than that. The following week, I moved into a small apartment. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom place with minimal furniture, but it was mine. It felt strange, being in a space that didn't hold any memories, that didn't belong to me in the way my old house did. But at the same time, there was a sense of freedom. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was constantly walking on eggshells, waiting for someone to tell me what to do. I was in control of my own life again, and it felt good. I spent the first few days cleaning, organizing, and making the apartment feel like home. I put up a few pictures on the walls. Nothing fancy, just some old family photos. I even bought a small plant, something to add a little life to the place. I didn't need much, just enough to make it feel like my own. As the days passed, I began to settle into a routine. I went for walks in the park, something I hadn't done in years. I started cooking for myself again, making the meals I used to enjoy before everything changed. I even joined a local book club, just to meet new people and keep myself busy. The loneliness was still there, lurking in the background, but it was quieter now. I was slowly learning to be content with my own company. One afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number. When I picked up, I heard Tom's voice on the other end. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, his tone tentative. I felt my heart skip a beat. I hadn't heard from him in days, and now, here he was, calling me. Part of me wanted to hang up, to continue living my life without them, but I knew I couldn't avoid this conversation forever. "What do you want to talk about?" I asked, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. There was a long pause before he answered. "I don't know where to start," he said. "I've been thinking a lot about what's been going on." His words were cautious, and I could sense the uncertainty in his voice. I stayed quiet, letting him speak. "Emily and we've been talking, and I realize now that I've been unfair to you. I'm sorry, Mom. I should have done more to make you feel like you belong." My heart tightened at his words. It wasn't the apology I had expected, but it was something. A small step toward healing, maybe. I didn't know if things could ever go back to the way they were, but hearing him admit that he was wrong gave me a sliver of hope. "Thank you for saying that," I replied softly. "But I need time. I need time to figure out where I fit in all of this." We talked for a little while longer, but I knew deep down that this was only the beginning. The path ahead would be long, and there would be challenges. But for the first time in a while, I felt like I was on the right track. I wasn't alone anymore, even if it meant standing up for myself and taking control of my own future. Weeks passed, and things between Tom and I started to feel a little more normal. He called more frequently, and even visited me a few times, though I could tell that things were still strained. It wasn't easy for either of us, but we were trying. Emily, however, remained distant. I hadn't heard from her since that last conversation, and I wasn't sure if she was even willing to acknowledge the changes that were happening. I wasn't sure if I wanted her to. The space between us had grown too wide, and I didn't know how to bridge it. Still, I found myself thinking about the past often, remembering how things used to be. I missed the closeness I had with Tom when he was younger, the trust we had. But it was clear now that trust, once broken, took a long time to rebuild. One afternoon, I was sitting in my small kitchen, sipping on tea, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment, I hesitated. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face any more surprises, especially after everything that had happened. When I opened the door, I was shocked to see Emily standing there. Her face was a mixture of uncertainty and something else I couldn't quite place. She stood there for a moment, as if unsure whether to speak. Finally, she cleared her throat. "Can we talk?" she asked. I nodded, stepping aside to let her in. We sat down in the living room, the silence between us heavy, thick with the weight of everything that had passed. She was the first to speak. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," Emily began, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. "About how we've treated you. And I realized that I've been unfair." I blinked, not sure if I was hearing her right. This was not the woman I had become used to. This was not the woman who had made me feel invisible, insignificant, over the past few months. "I know I've been distant," she continued. "And I know that I pushed you away. I'm sorry for that. I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't know how to balance everything, with the kids and the house, and—" She stopped, looking down at her hands. For the first time, I saw vulnerability in her. It was like I was seeing a side of Emily I had never seen before. A side that wasn't hardened by resentment or frustration. I wasn't sure how to react. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to just let everything go. But another part of me, the part that had been hurt so many times, hesitated. "I'm glad you came," I finally said, my voice quiet but steady. "But I need time. We both need time." She nodded. "I understand. It wasn't the end of the story, I knew that. But it was a start. We weren't all the way there, not yet." But in that moment, for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't entirely alone in this. I wasn't the only one trying to mend what had been broken. The days that followed Emily's visit felt strangely lighter. I wasn't sure if it was the beginning of something new or just a temporary truce, but for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to hope. I spent my days settling into the small routine I had created for myself, walking through the neighborhood, visiting the local bookstore, cooking meals that brought me comfort. It wasn't much, but it was enough for now. The quiet had become familiar, almost soothing. I had grown used to being on my own, to having only my thoughts and the space to breathe. But that didn't mean the ache of loss had disappeared. No, it still lingered, just under the surface, waiting for a moment to remind me of what I had left behind. I had dinner with some friends a few weeks later, women I had met through my book club. They were kind, warm, and made me feel like I belonged somewhere again. As we sat around the table, laughing and talking about books, I realized something. I was starting to find pieces of myself that had been buried for so long. The part of me that loved to read, to engage in conversations without worrying about someone needing something from me, was slowly coming back. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And that night, as I sat in the comfort of new friends, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I could start rebuilding a life outside of my past. It was a slow process, and it wasn't easy, but it was mine. A few days later, I received a text from Tom. He asked if I wanted to have lunch. I hesitated for a moment. Part of me wanted to say no, to keep my distance, but another part of me knew that I couldn't just shut him out forever. We met at a small cafe downtown. The conversation was awkward at first, both of us unsure of how to bridge the gap that had formed between us. But as we talked, something shifted. We began to share more, not just the surface-level pleasantries, but the deeper things, the regrets, the misunderstandings, the pain. It wasn't a magic fix, but it was a start. By the end of the lunch, I felt a little lighter, like a weight had been lifted from my chest. Maybe things would never be the same, but they didn't have to be. I didn't need to go back to what we were. I just needed to find a way to move forward, even if that meant redefining what family meant to me. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what the future held. I was ready to face it, one step at a time. Months passed, and life continued to unfold in ways I never expected. Tom and I kept in touch more regularly, sharing updates, checking in with each other. Things weren't perfect, but they were better. We were both trying, and that was all I could ask for. As the days turned into weeks, the apartment I had once seen as a temporary place of solitude began to feel more like home. I started decorating it more, hanging pictures, adding little touches that reflected who I was. Slowly, I was rediscovering the parts of myself that I had put aside for so long. It wasn't just about filling the space around me. It was about filling the space inside me that had been empty for too long. I went to visit some old friends, reconnected with people I hadn't spoken to in years, and it felt like a breath of fresh air. I was reminded of who I used to be before everything changed. One day, as I sat in my apartment, sipping my coffee, I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. I was starting to find joy again, in the small things, in the little moments that once seemed insignificant. It was a long journey, one filled with ups and downs, but I was beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel. A few weeks ago, Emily called me. It was unexpected, and I wasn't sure what to expect, but when I answered, her voice was softer than it had been in months. "Mom," she said, "I know things have been hard, and I haven't been there like I should. I'm sorry. I want to make things right." I could hear the sincerity in her voice, and for the first time, I believed her. We talked for a while, catching up on life, talking about the kids and everything that had happened. It wasn't easy, but we made progress. I wasn't ready to forget everything, but I was willing to start over, to rebuild our relationship, one step at a time. A few days later, I received a letter from Tom. It was short, but it said everything I needed to hear. "Mom, I know things aren't perfect, but I want you to know that I love you. You will always be a part of this family, no matter what. I'm sorry for how things have been. I'm proud of you for how strong you've been. Let's keep moving forward." Reading those words brought tears to my eyes, not because I was sad, but because for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. I wasn't just the woman who had been pushed aside. I was still important. I was still loved. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be bumps along the way, but I was ready to move forward. I wasn't alone anymore. I had my own life to live, and that was enough.